The soup was meant to heal, not harm. But Maria's trembling hands refused to lift the spoon to Emily's lips. In that moment, she became the only thing standing between innocence and evil. I don't know where you're listening from. Maybe you're caring for a child that isn't yours, setting a dinner table or waiting for someone to say thank you. It doesn't matter what time it is, but I promise, today's story will touch your heart. The fog rolled thick across San Francisco Bay that October morning, wrapping around the towering mansions of Nob Hill like a silk shroud. Inside one of those grand homes, Maria Gonzalez moved through the marble hallways with the quiet grace of someone who had learned to make herself invisible. Her worn canvas shoes barely whispered against the polished floors as she carried a breakfast tray up the curved staircase, the silver gleaming under crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's yearly income. At 52, Maria's hands told stories her voice never would. Calloused from years of scrubbing, folding, and soothing, they moved with practiced efficiency as she arranged fresh daisies in the children's rooms. The scars on her knuckles spoke of late nights spent mending torn clothes and broken hearts, while the gentle curve of her fingers revealed the countless times she had wiped away tears that weren't her own. Theodore Whitman's mansion stood as a testament to his tech empire's success. The cryptocurrency investments alone could have purchased half of downtown San Francisco, and his stock portfolio fluctuated by millions each trading day. Yet for all his wealth, measured in Bitcoin wallets and real estate holdings that stretched across 3 states, the house felt hollow. Empty rooms echoed with the absence of the love that money couldn't buy. Maria had arrived at the Whitman home 3 years earlier, when grief still hung over the family like morning fog. Theodore's wife, Catherine, had lost her battle with cancer just months before, leaving behind 2 young children who didn't understand why Mommy wouldn't come home anymore. 8-year-old Lucas had grown sullen and withdrawn, while 4-year-old Emily clung to anyone who showed her kindness, desperate to fill the void where maternal love used to live. The employment agency had presented Maria's resume as impressive enough: 15 years of experience with affluent families, impeccable references, and a clean background check. But what they couldn't quantify on paper was the way her eyes softened when she looked at children, or how her presence seemed to calm even the most restless spirits. Theodore had hired her within minutes of their interview, though he barely looked up from his laptop during their conversation. Maria understood his distance. She had learned long ago that wealthy men often built walls around their hearts the same way they built walls around their estates. What she hadn't expected was how desperately these children needed someone to see them, truly see them, beyond their designer clothes and expensive toys. In her small apartment in Oakland, Maria kept a photograph on her nightstand, a baby boy with her eyes and her late husband's smile. Miguel would have been 25 now, if pneumonia hadn't taken him when he was barely 2 years old. She had carried that loss with her for over 2 decades, the weight of it shaping every interaction with the children she cared for after. Each lullaby she sang carried the memory of songs her son would never hear, and every scraped knee she bandaged was a chance to offer the tenderness she hadn't been able to give long enough. The first morning in the Whitman home, Maria had found Lucas sitting alone at the massive dining table, staring at a bowl of untouched cereal. The kitchen staff bustled around him, preparing elaborate meals for Theodore's business meetings, but no one seemed to notice the little boy's slumped shoulders or the way he pushed his food around without eating. Maria had quietly sat beside him, not speaking, just sharing his silence until he felt safe enough to whisper that he missed his mom's pancakes. From that moment, Maria's mission became clear. These children needed more than supervision. They needed someone to hold their world together while their father rebuilt his from the fractured pieces grief had left behind. She learned Emily's favorite bedtime stories and discovered that Lucas found comfort in drawing comic book heroes who could save everyone they loved. She memorized their fears, their dreams, and the precise way they liked their sandwiches cut. The mansion's other staff, a rotating cast of housekeepers, gardeners, and personal assistants, came and went like seasons. They were professionals, efficient and discreet, the kind of help that wealthy families preferred, invisible until needed, gone without trace when not. But Maria was different. She wove herself into the fabric of the children's daily lives, becoming the constant they could depend on when everything else felt uncertain. Theodore's home office overlooked the bay, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that real estate agents would describe as priceless. His desk held multiple monitors displaying stock charts, cryptocurrency exchanges, and email threads that determined the fate of startups across Silicon Valley. He conducted conference calls worth millions while his children ate breakfast one floor below, their laughter filtering up through the mansion's expensive soundproofing like music he had forgotten how to hear. Maria noticed everything Theodore missed. She saw how Lucas flinched when doors slammed too loudly, a remnant from the months when the house had been filled with medical equipment and hushed conversation. She observed Emily's habit of saving half her dinner for later, a childhood anxiety about things disappearing without warning. These small details became her roadmap for healing, gentle corrections applied with the patience of someone who understood that love was built through consistency, not grand gestures. The children's bedrooms were showcases of privilege. Emily's dollhouse was a custom replica of their own mansion, complete with working elevators and chandeliers. Lucas's room featured every gaming console money could buy, arranged on shelves that looked more like an electronics showroom than a child's space. But what Maria added couldn't be purchased. The smell of fresh-baked cookies wafting up from the kitchen, the sound of her humming while she folded their clothes, the feeling of being tucked in by someone who genuinely cared whether they had sweet dreams. Every morning, Maria would arrive before dawn, letting herself in through the service entrance and beginning her quiet orchestration of the household's rhythm. She would start coffee for Theodore, prepare healthy lunches for the children, and make sure everyone had what they needed before the day's chaos began. Her own needs, coffee, breakfast, a moment to breathe, came last, if at all. The loneliness Maria felt in that grand house was different from the solitude of her Oakland apartment. At home, she was alone, but belonged to herself. In the mansion, she was surrounded by people yet felt invisible, a ghost who cleaned up messes and solved problems without acknowledgement. Theodore's interactions with her were brief and businesslike, requests for schedule changes, reminders about appointments, instructions delivered without eye contact. She was Maria the nanny, not Maria the person who kept his children's hearts beating. But children see what adults choose to ignore. Lucas began leaving small drawings on Maria's pillow, stick figures of their family that always included a woman with Maria's curly hair standing next to the children. Emily would sneak into the kitchen while Maria cooked, chattering about her day and asking questions about Maria's life that no adult had bothered to voice. Where did she live? Did she have pets? What was her favorite color? These conversations, conducted over mixing bowls and cutting boards, became the foundation of trust that would later save Emily's life. The autumn when everything changed began like any other. The children were settled into their school routines. Theodore was managing a complicated merger that kept him traveling frequently, and Maria maintained her invisible presence, ensuring that life continued smoothly despite the family's emotional distance. The mansion's net worth had increased substantially thanks to Theodore's latest ventures, but its atmosphere remained as cold as the fog that rolled in each evening from the bay. Then Emily began getting sick. At first, it seemed like ordinary childhood illnesses, stomach aches that came and went, bouts of fatigue that could be explained by growth spurts or busy school days. But Maria's maternal instincts, honed by years of caring for children and sharpened by the loss of her own son, sensed something wrong. Emily's symptoms followed no pattern that Maria recognized, appearing and disappearing with a randomness that made her uneasy. The night Maria refused to give Emily the soup would be remembered as the moment when her invisible love finally demanded to be seen. Standing in that opulent kitchen, surrounded by appliances that cost more than most people's cars, Maria felt the weight of every instinct she had learned to trust. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and she was the only one close enough to Emily to see it. Theodore's initial reaction was predictable, confusion mixed with irritation that his employee was questioning his judgment about his own child's care. But Maria's quiet insistence, the way her hands shook as she explained her concerns, forced him to look beyond his preconceptions. For the first time since she had entered his employment, he truly saw her, not as hired help, but as a woman whose devotion to his children exceeded his own. The investigation that followed revealed a truth that shattered Theodore's understanding of his carefully controlled world. The mansion's longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, had been slowly poisoning Emily with small doses of cleaning chemicals mixed into her food. The motivation was as twisted as it was simple. Jealousy toward Maria's growing influence with the children, combined with a delusional belief that removing Emily would somehow make Lucas more dependent on Mrs. Hartwell's care. Mrs. Hartwell had worked for the family for over a decade, predating even Catherine's illness. She had been a fixture during the worst moments of Theodore's life, managing household affairs while he focused on his wife's treatment and his business empire's survival. Her betrayal cut deeper than any financial loss could, a reminder that trust was a luxury even the wealthy couldn't afford to take for granted. The discovery process was harrowing. Medical tests confirmed trace amounts of industrial cleaning agents in Emily's system, enough to cause chronic illness, but not immediate death. Mrs. Hartwell's plan had been insidiously patient, a slow poisoning designed to look like a chronic condition, the kind of tragedy that could befall any family regardless of their wealth or privilege. Only Maria's vigilance and willingness to speak up despite her vulnerable position had prevented a catastrophe. As Theodore held his daughter in the hospital, waiting for the toxins to clear from her small body, he finally understood what Maria had been to his family. She wasn't just an employee who had saved Emily's life. She was the woman who had been raising his children while he lost himself in work and grief. Every scraped knee she had bandaged, every nightmare she had soothed, every moment of patience she had shown when he had been too emotionally unavailable to parent effectively. These were the actions of love, not duty. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. Mrs. Hartwell was arrested and charged with attempted murder, her decades of service erased by the magnitude of her betrayal. But the justice system's response, however appropriate, couldn't heal the trauma of discovering that danger had lived within the walls Theodore had believed were safe. Maria's response to being vindicated surprised everyone, especially Theodore. She showed no triumph, no satisfaction at being proven right. Instead, she focused entirely on Emily's recovery, spending days at the hospital reading stories and singing lullabies while the little girl's body fought to heal itself. When reporters tried to interview her about her heroic actions, Maria declined, saying only that she had done what any mother would do. The word mother hung in the air like an accusation. Theodore realized that Maria had indeed become a mother to his children, filling the void Catherine's death had left, with a love so quiet and consistent that he had taken it completely for granted. His wealth had allowed him to hire the best nannies money could buy, but money hadn't bought what Maria had freely given, a mother's heart. Emily's recovery was slow but complete. The little girl, who had grown thin and listless under Mrs. Hartwell's poisonous care, began to bloom again under Maria's watchful attention. Her appetite returned, her energy rebounded, and most importantly, her trust in the world began to heal. But the experience had changed her, made her more clingy with Maria and more suspicious of strangers, a reminder that innocence, once damaged, never fully returns to its original state. Lucas, who had initially been skeptical of Maria when she first arrived, became fiercely protective of her after learning how she had saved his sister. At 11, he was old enough to understand that Maria's quick thinking and courage had prevented a tragedy that would have destroyed what remained of their family. He began including her in conversations about his future, asking her opinion about schools and activities with the seriousness of someone who valued her judgment. But perhaps the most significant change occurred in Theodore himself. The businessman who had built a tech empire worth hundreds of millions, whose investment portfolio included everything from traditional stocks to cutting-edge cryptocurrency, finally learned to value something that couldn't be quantified in dollars or measured in profit margins. Maria's love for his children was worth more than all his assets combined, and he had nearly lost it through his own blindness and neglect. The mansion's atmosphere began to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. Theodore started joining his family for dinner more often, putting away his phone and actually listening to his children's stories about their days. He began to notice the small details that made their house a home. The way Maria remembered everyone's preferences, how she could sense moods and adjust her approach accordingly, the quiet efficiency with which she managed not just schedules, but emotions. One evening, as Theodore watched Maria help Emily with homework while Lucas practiced piano nearby, he was struck by the realization that this scene, this moment of ordinary domestic peace, was more valuable than any business deal he had ever closed. The woman who had once been nearly invisible to him was revealed as the architect of his children's happiness, the silent guardian who had kept their world stable while his own threatened to crumble. Maria's own healing was slower and more complex. The trauma of discovering Mrs. Hartwell's betrayal, combined with the stress of nearly losing Emily, had taken its toll. She had spent months walking on eggshells, wondering who else in the household might harbor resentment toward her growing influence with the children. The mansion that had once felt like a workplace now felt like a potential battleground, every interaction scrutinized for signs of hidden animosity. But gradually, as the household staff was carefully vetted and replaced, Maria began to reclaim her sense of security. Theodore's new appreciation for her role helped enormously. He made sure she understood that her voice mattered, that her concerns would always be heard and acted upon. He also increased her salary substantially, though Maria was more moved by his acknowledgement of her worth than by the financial recognition. The children, too, played a crucial role in Maria's healing. Emily's complete trust in her care, despite everything that had happened, reminded Maria that her love had indeed made a difference. Lucas's growing maturity and his obvious respect for her judgment helped her see herself through his eyes, not as a servant, but as a valued family member whose opinions mattered. Theodore's business continued to thrive, but his priorities had fundamentally shifted. He still managed his investments and oversaw his companies, but he no longer allowed work to consume him entirely. He learned to delegate more effectively, trusting his executives to handle daily operations while he focused on being present for the moments that mattered most: soccer games, school plays, bedtime stories. The mansion itself underwent subtle but significant changes. Theodore had Maria's input considered in household decisions, from menu planning to decorating choices. Her small apartment above the garage was renovated and expanded, transformed from servants' quarters into a comfortable home that reflected her importance to the family. He also established a college fund for any children Maria might want to help in the future, understanding that her nurturing instincts extended beyond his own family. As months passed, the Whitman family developed new traditions that included Maria as a central figure rather than a background presence. Holiday celebrations featured her favorite foods alongside traditional fare. Family photos included her without question. When Theodore's business associates visited, he introduced Maria as his children's second mother, not their nanny, a distinction that meant everything to her. Lucas's transition to high school brought new challenges, but with Maria's guidance, he navigated them successfully. She helped him understand that his family's wealth was a privilege that came with responsibilities, teaching him empathy for those who hadn't been born with such advantages. Her own background, growing up in Oakland's working-class neighborhoods, provided him with perspectives he wouldn't have gained otherwise. Emily, now fully recovered and thriving, became Maria's shadow and greatest advocate. She would tell anyone who would listen about how Maria had saved her life, though she didn't fully understand the details of what had happened. What she did understand was that Maria loved her unconditionally, the kind of fierce, protective love that would move mountains if necessary. The legal resolution of Mrs. Hartwell's case brought a sense of closure, if not complete peace. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempted murder, a verdict that acknowledged the seriousness of her crimes while providing some measure of justice for the trauma she had inflicted. Maria attended the sentencing hearing, not out of vindictiveness, but to bear witness to the truth and to ensure that Emily's story was heard and believed. Theodore's appreciation for Maria extended beyond his immediate family to his broader business community. He began advocating for better treatment and recognition of domestic workers, using his influence and wealth to support organizations that provided job training, health care, and legal protections for nannies, housekeepers, and caregivers. His tech company established a foundation focused on supporting what he called the invisible workforce, the people whose labor made privileged lifestyles possible, but who rarely received recognition for their contributions. The foundation's first major initiative was a scholarship program for the children of domestic workers, providing them with educational opportunities that might otherwise be financially impossible. Maria was invited to serve on the selection committee, her insights invaluable in identifying young people who possessed both academic potential and the character traits that would help them succeed. As Theodore watched Maria interact with scholarship applicants and their families, he was reminded again of her unique ability to see potential where others saw only problems. She could spot resilience in a teenager who had moved frequently due to their parents' employment, or recognize leadership qualities in a shy child who helped care for younger siblings. Her recommendations were always thoughtful and usually proved accurate. The transformation of their relationship from employer-employee to something approaching family was gradual but unmistakable. Theodore began asking Maria's advice on personal matters, valuing her wisdom about human nature and relationships. She helped him navigate the complex social dynamics of single parenthood among San Francisco's elite, understanding both the privileges and pressures their situation entailed. Maria's own social world expanded as well. Through the foundation's work, she met other caregivers who had faced similar challenges and triumphs. Their shared experiences created bonds that transcended the isolation she had felt during her early years with the Whitmans. She realized that her story, the invisible woman whose love saved a child, was not unique, but part of a larger narrative about the unrecognized heroes who keep families functioning. The mansion's weekly routine now included regular family meetings where everyone, including Maria, could voice concerns and suggestions. These gatherings, initially awkward and formal, gradually became comfortable spaces for genuine communication. Lucas would discuss his academic goals and social pressures. Emily would share her dreams and fears. Theodore would update everyone on business travel that might affect their schedules. And Maria would offer observations about the family's dynamics, helping them recognize and address problems before they became crises. One particularly memorable family meeting occurred on the second anniversary of Emily's poisoning. Instead of treating it as a day to forget, they decided to commemorate it as a celebration of Maria's heroism and Emily's resilience. Theodore had commissioned a portrait of Maria to hang in the main hallway, depicting her not in work clothes, but in elegant attire that honored her dignity and importance. The unveiling was emotional for everyone, but especially for Maria, who had never expected to see herself represented as anything more than hired help. The portrait's placement was significant. Visitors to the mansion now encountered Maria's image before they saw paintings of Theodore's business achievements or family ancestry. It was a visual statement about the family's values and priorities, a recognition that love and loyalty were more important than wealth and status. Lucas's acceptance to Stanford University brought both joy and anxiety to the family. As he prepared to leave for college, he made it clear that Maria's guidance had been instrumental in his academic success and personal development. He credited her with teaching him empathy, work ethic, and the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their social position. His graduation speech included a tribute to Maria that moved her to tears and earned a standing ovation from the audience. Emily's development continued to flourish under Maria's care. Now, 8 years old, she showed remarkable emotional intelligence and compassion for others, traits that Maria had carefully nurtured. She volunteered at local shelters with Maria, learning that their privilege came with obligations to help those less fortunate. These experiences, guided by Maria's wisdom, were shaping Emily into the kind of person who would use her advantages to benefit others. Theodore's business success continued, but he increasingly viewed his wealth as a tool for creating positive change rather than simply accumulating more assets. His investment strategy now included significant allocations to socially responsible companies and organizations that aligned with his evolved values. The foundation's endowment grew steadily, funded by profits from his various enterprises and managed with the same attention to detail he brought to his personal portfolio. The mansion itself had evolved from a showcase of wealth to a genuine home where love and respect were the most valuable currencies. Guest bedrooms were frequently occupied by Maria's extended family members visiting from Oakland, a development that would have been unthinkable in the early years of her employment. These visits brought additional warmth and cultural richness to the household, exposing the children to perspectives and experiences beyond their privileged bubble. Maria's influence on the family's cultural awareness was profound. She introduced them to Mexican traditions and celebrations, teaching them Spanish phrases and preparing traditional foods that became family favorites. Her stories about growing up in Oakland's diverse neighborhoods helped the children understand the broader community they were part of, beyond their exclusive Nob Hill enclave. The annual Dia de los Muertos celebration became one of the family's most meaningful traditions. Maria would create an ofrenda honoring both her late son Miguel and Catherine, Theodore's deceased wife. This blending of grief and remembrance, guided by Maria's cultural wisdom, helped the family process their losses in healthy ways while celebrating the continuing influence of those they had loved. Theodore's dating life, when he eventually felt ready to consider it, was significantly influenced by Maria's insights and the children's comfort levels. Any woman who couldn't appreciate Maria's role in their family or who seemed threatened by her importance was quickly eliminated from consideration. When Theodore finally met someone who respected and valued Maria from their first meeting, everyone recognized it as a positive development. The woman who eventually became Theodore's second wife, Dr. Sarah Chen, was a pediatric oncologist who immediately understood and appreciated the depth of Maria's bond with the children. Her own experience caring for vulnerable patients had taught her to recognize genuine compassion, and she saw in Maria a kindred spirit who put children's welfare above all other considerations. Their friendship became one of mutual respect and shared commitment to the family's well-being. Sarah's integration into the family was smooth, partly because Maria helped facilitate it. She understood that the children needed to see her approval of their father's new relationship, and she genuinely liked Sarah's warmth and medical expertise. When Emily had questions about her earlier poisoning, Sarah was able to explain the medical aspects in age-appropriate terms, while Maria provided emotional support and reassurance. The wedding, held in the mansion's garden, featured Maria prominently in the ceremony. She walked Emily down the aisle as a flower girl and stood with the family during the vows, her presence acknowledging that this marriage was not just between Theodore and Sarah, but an expansion of a family unit that already included her as an essential member. The photographs from that day showed a diverse group of people connected by love rather than obligation, a visual representation of what modern families could become when built on respect and genuine care. Lucas's college years brought regular video calls where he would update not just his father and stepmother, but Maria as well, recognizing her continued importance in his life despite the physical distance. His academic success and growing social consciousness reflected the values she had helped instill, particularly his involvement in campus organizations focused on social justice and economic equality. Emily's relationship with Maria deepened as she grew older and could better understand the magnitude of what had happened when she was small. Rather than feeling traumatized by the knowledge that someone had tried to harm her, she felt profound gratitude for Maria's protection and love. This gratitude translated into a fierce loyalty and a determination to honor Maria's example of putting others' needs first. The Foundation's work expanded internationally, supporting caregiver networks in developing countries where domestic workers faced even greater challenges and fewer protections. Maria's involvement in these efforts brought her full circle from someone who had felt powerless and invisible to an advocate for others in similar situations. Her presentations at conferences were powerful testimonies to the importance of recognizing and valuing care work. Theodore's net worth had increased substantially over the years, but he increasingly measured wealth in different terms: the trust and love of his children, the respect of his community, and the knowledge that his resources were being used to help others provided satisfaction that purely financial gains never could. His investment in Maria, not just her salary and benefits, but the recognition of her worth as a person, had yielded returns that couldn't be quantified in traditional economic terms. The mansion's legacy evolved from being simply an impressive piece of real estate to becoming a symbol of how American families could bridge class and cultural divides through mutual respect and genuine care. Visitors often commented on the warmth and authenticity they felt there, an atmosphere that reflected Maria's influence on every aspect of family life. As Emily approached high school, she began expressing interest in following Sarah's path into medicine, specifically pediatric care. Her motivation was clear. She wanted to protect children the way Maria had protected her, using different skills but the same underlying commitment to putting vulnerable people first. Maria's pride in Emily's aspirations was evident to everyone who knew them. Lucas's trajectory toward business school was similarly influenced by Maria's example, but his focus was on social entrepreneurship rather than pure profit maximization. He wanted to build companies that created good jobs and positive social impact, understanding that business success without ethical foundations was ultimately hollow. His senior thesis on the economic value of care work cited Maria's story prominently, contributing to academic discussions about how society should value unpaid and undervalued labor. Theodore's own evolution continued as he approached his 50s. The driven entrepreneur who had once measured success in stock prices and acquisition deals now found greater satisfaction in the Foundation's work and his children's development. His business empire continued to grow, but it was guided by principles that Maria's example had helped clarify: that true wealth included treating everyone with dignity and using privilege to create opportunities for others. The annual family vacation had evolved from expensive resort stays to meaningful travel experiences that broadened everyone's perspectives. Maria's suggestions often guided their destinations, introducing them to places and cultures that connected to her own heritage or interests. These trips became educational experiences that deepened the children's understanding of global communities and their own responsibilities as privileged Americans. One particularly meaningful journey took them to Maria's grandmother's village in Mexico, where they met extended family members and learned about the rural community that had shaped Maria's early values. The contrast between their San Francisco mansion and this simple farming community could have been jarring, but Maria's guidance helped the children see connections rather than differences: the universal importance of family bonds, hard work, and mutual support. The village visit also provided context for understanding how Maria's migration to California represented both loss and opportunity. She had left behind a supportive community and familiar traditions to provide better opportunities for herself, and later to offer her skills and heart to families who needed what she could provide. The children gained appreciation for the sacrifice inherent in immigration and the courage required to build new lives in unfamiliar places. Theodore's business network had gradually shifted to include more diverse voices and perspectives, influenced partly by Maria's insights about the broader community. His investment decisions increasingly considered social impact alongside financial returns, and he actively sought out entrepreneurs from backgrounds similar to Maria's, recognizing that diverse perspectives led to better business outcomes. The Foundation's scholarship program had grown to support hundreds of students annually, many of whom were first-generation college attendees whose parents worked in domestic or care industries. Maria's role in mentoring these young people had become one of her greatest sources of satisfaction, watching them overcome obstacles similar to ones she had faced and achieve educational goals that had once seemed impossible. Several scholarship recipients had maintained relationships with the family long after graduation, becoming part of an extended network that resembled a chosen family. Their success stories, becoming teachers, nurses, engineers, entrepreneurs, validated Maria's belief that love and support could transform lives across generational and economic boundaries. Emily's quinceañera celebration was planned as a tribute to Maria's cultural heritage, as much as a coming-of-age party for Emily herself. The event blended Mexican traditions with the family's American experiences, featuring traditional dances, foods, and ceremonies that honored both cultures. Maria's joy at seeing these traditions embraced and celebrated by the family she had helped raise was evident to all the guests. The quinceañera also marked Emily's formal request to legally add Maria's surname to her own name, a symbol of her recognition that Maria was family in every way that mattered. The legal process was simple compared to the emotional significance of the gesture, representing Emily's understanding that family bonds are created through love and loyalty rather than biology or legal documents. Lucas's graduation from Stanford brought the family together for a celebration that highlighted how much had changed since Maria first arrived at their home. The young man who accepted his diploma was confident, compassionate, and committed to using his privileges responsibly, qualities that reflected both his father's entrepreneurial spirit and Maria's moral guidance. His commencement address focused on the importance of recognizing unsung heroes, specifically mentioning Maria as someone who had shaped his character profoundly. Theodore's own recognition came in various forms over the years: business awards, philanthropic honors, and community leadership acknowledgments. But the recognition that meant most to him was seeing his children develop into thoughtful, caring adults who understood their obligations to others. This success was measured not in financial terms, but in human ones, and he understood that Maria's influence had been crucial to this achievement. The mansion's role as a community gathering place had evolved naturally from its function as a family home. The large spaces that had once seemed empty and formal now hosted foundation events, scholarship celebrations, and cultural programs that brought together people from across San Francisco's diverse neighborhoods. Maria's comfort in these settings, moving easily between different social groups and cultural communities, demonstrated her unique ability to build bridges between worlds that often remained separate. Sarah's integration into the family had been complete for several years, but she never forgot that her acceptance depended partly on Maria's approval and support. Their relationship had evolved into genuine friendship based on shared commitment to the children's well-being and mutual respect for each other's roles in the family structure. Sarah's medical expertise complemented Maria's emotional wisdom, creating a supportive environment that addressed both physical and psychological needs. The annual anniversary of Emily's poisoning had transformed from a day of painful memory into a celebration of resilience and the power of protective love. The family would spend the day together, often visiting the children's hospital where Emily had recovered, bringing gifts and encouragement to current patients and their families. These visits reminded everyone of how close they had come to tragedy and how Maria's vigilance had prevented it. Maria's own extended family in Oakland had prospered partly through the opportunities that her success had created. Her nephews and nieces received educational support through the foundation, while her siblings found better employment opportunities through Theodore's business network. This ripple effect of opportunity demonstrated how individual success, when shared generously, could benefit entire communities. The foundation's research into domestic worker rights and protections had influenced policy discussions at state and national levels. Maria's testimony before legislative committees carried particular weight because she could speak from personal experience about both the vulnerabilities and the essential contributions of care workers. Her advocacy helped pass legislation improving workplace protections and ensuring fair wages for domestic employees throughout California. Theodore's wealth continued to grow through successful investments and business ventures, but his spending patterns had changed dramatically under Maria's influence. While the family maintained their comfortable lifestyle, extravagant purchases had been replaced by thoughtful investments in experiences and opportunities that created lasting value. The mansion's grandeur was balanced by its function as a space for meaningful gatherings and community building. The children's understanding of their privilege had developed sophistication appropriate to their ages. Lucas, now working in sustainable business development in Silicon Valley, regularly consulted with Maria about community impact and social responsibility aspects of his projects. Emily, excelling in her pre-med studies, volunteered at clinics serving low-income families, following Maria's example of using her advantages to help others who had fewer resources. Maria's own aging process was supported by the family she had helped create and sustain. As she entered her 60s, her role gradually shifted from primary caregiver to respected advisor and beloved family elder. The physical demands of childcare were reduced, but her emotional importance to the family remained unchanged. Theodore had established a generous retirement plan for her, ensuring financial security for her later years regardless of her ability to continue working. The mansion's daily rhythm had stabilized into patterns that reflected everyone's needs and contributions. Morning conversations over coffee included everyone's input about daily plans and concerns. Evening dinners featured discussions about current events, personal goals, and family matters that required collective consideration. Maria's perspectives were valued equally with everyone else's, a recognition of her wisdom and experience that had taken years to develop but was now unquestioned. Special occasions continued to highlight the family's evolution from a traditional employer-employee relationship to something more akin to an extended multi-generational family. Birthdays, holidays, and achievements were celebrated together with attention to everyone's traditions and preferences. The Mexican dishes Maria prepared were now as much family favorites as traditional American foods, while holiday celebrations included elements from multiple cultural backgrounds. The foundation's impact had grown far beyond its original scope, supporting not just individual scholarships, but systemic changes in how society valued care work. Research projects funded by the foundation documented the economic importance of domestic labor, and advocacy efforts promoted policy changes that provided better protections and recognition for care workers throughout the United States. Maria's speeches at foundation events and academic conferences were powerful testimonies to the transformation possible when kindness and recognition replace invisibility and exploitation. Her story resonated with audiences across different backgrounds because it illustrated universal themes of dignity, respect, and the power of love to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The international recognition that began to come to both Theodore and Maria for their foundation work brought opportunities to influence global conversations about domestic work and family structures. Their joint presentations at conferences demonstrated how mutual respect could create family bonds that transcended traditional categories of employer and employee, rich and poor, native-born and immigrant. Theodore's business legacy was increasingly defined not just by financial success, but by ethical leadership and social impact. Companies in his investment portfolio were selected based on criteria that included worker treatment, environmental responsibility, and community benefit alongside financial performance. This approach, influenced by values Maria had helped him develop, demonstrated that profitable business could align with moral principles. Lucas's career path in sustainable business development reflected the influence of both his father's entrepreneurial spirit and Maria's social consciousness. His work focused on creating companies that provided good jobs while addressing environmental and social challenges, understanding that business success required consideration of multiple stakeholder interests rather than just shareholder profits. Emily's progression through pre-medical studies was supported by practical experience, volunteering in community health settings, where Maria's connections helped her understand healthcare challenges facing low-income families. These experiences were shaping her into a doctor who would understand patients' lives beyond their medical conditions, recognizing social and economic factors that affected health outcomes. Sarah's medical practice had also evolved under the family's influence, expanding to include more pro bono work and community health education. Her marriage to Theodore had connected her to philanthropic opportunities she might not have encountered otherwise, while Maria's example had deepened her commitment to serving families with fewer resources and advantages. As Maria approached her 65th birthday, the family began planning a celebration that would honor not just her personal milestone, but her transformative impact on their lives and community. The event planning process became an opportunity to reflect on the journey from their initial meeting, when she was nearly invisible, hired help, to the current reality where she was a respected family matriarch and community leader. The celebration itself brought together people from every aspect of Maria's life: childhood friends from Oakland, scholarship recipients from the foundation, domestic worker advocacy organizations, and San Francisco community leaders who had worked with her on policy issues. The diversity of attendees illustrated how far her influence had spread beyond the mansion's walls. Theodore's tribute speech focused on Maria's courage in speaking up when Emily was in danger, but he expanded the theme to encompass all the ways she had demonstrated moral leadership throughout their relationship. Her willingness to prioritize children's welfare over personal security, her commitment to treating everyone with dignity regardless of their position, and her consistent example of putting service to others before personal advancement were qualities he credited with transforming their entire family. The foundation announced the establishment of the Maria Gonzalez Institute for Domestic Worker Rights and Recognition, a research and advocacy center that would continue her work on systemic issues affecting care workers. The Institute's endowment would ensure that her example of courage and compassion would influence policy and practice long into the future, creating lasting change beyond individual success stories. Maria's response to these honors was characteristically focused on others rather than herself. Her speech emphasized the other domestic workers who had shown similar courage and devotion, but whose stories had never been recognized or celebrated. She dedicated the Institute to all the invisible women who had raised other people's children with love while struggling for recognition and respect in their own lives. The evening concluded with Emily's performance of a song she had written about Maria's influence on her life, a musical tribute that captured both the pain of her childhood poisoning and the healing power of Maria's protective love. The melody was based on lullabies Maria had sung during Emily's recovery, transformed into a celebration of resilience and familial bonds that transcended traditional categories. Lucas's video message from his work assignment overseas included footage of sustainable development projects that applied principles he had learned from Maria: the importance of respecting local communities, understanding that economic development must benefit everyone rather than just investors, and recognizing that lasting success required attention to human relationships as much as business metrics. The Foundation's annual report, released in conjunction with Maria's birthday celebration, documented the broad impact of programs that had grown from Theodore's initial desire to honor Maria's example. Hundreds of scholarship recipients, policy changes in multiple states, research projects that influenced academic understanding of care work, and community programs that supported domestic workers demonstrated how individual recognition could expand into systemic change. Media coverage of the celebration brought national attention to issues affecting domestic workers and highlighted the possibility for more equitable relationships between employers and caregivers. Maria's story resonated with audiences across the country because it illustrated both the problems and the potential solutions for recognizing and respecting care work in American society. The private family moments during the birthday weekend were perhaps more meaningful than the public recognition. Quiet conversations between Maria and each family member allowed for expressions of gratitude and love that had developed over years of shared experiences. These intimate exchanges confirmed that the formal honors reflected genuine emotional bonds rather than mere public relations gestures. Theodore's gift to Maria was a property deed for her Oakland apartment building, which he had quietly purchased and renovated to provide secure, affordable housing for her extended family and other domestic workers. The gesture ensured that she would never face housing insecurity and created a legacy that would benefit her community long after she was gone. Emily's gift was more personal, a photo album documenting their relationship from her earliest memories through recent family adventures. Each picture was accompanied by Emily's written reflections on what Maria had meant to her during different phases of her life, creating a narrative of love and growth that honored both their individual journeys and shared experiences. Lucas had created a scholarship in Maria's name at his university, specifically designed to support students from domestic worker families who were pursuing business education with commitments to social responsibility. The scholarship's criteria reflected values he had learned from Maria, emphasizing character and community commitment alongside academic achievement. Sarah's contribution was a comprehensive health and wellness program for domestic workers, developed through her medical practice and offered through the foundation. The program addressed both physical health needs and mental health support, recognizing that care workers often neglected their own well-being while focusing on others' needs. The birthday celebration marked not an ending, but a transition to a new phase of Maria's life, where her wisdom and experience would be devoted primarily to advocacy and mentorship rather than daily child care. Her official retirement from full-time employment was accompanied by a new role as the Foundation's Director of Community Engagement, ensuring that her practical experience would continue to guide program development. The mansion's daily rhythm adjusted to reflect Maria's changing role while maintaining the emotional bonds that had developed over years of shared life. She maintained her apartment in the house while also spending more time in Oakland, where she was increasingly involved in community organizing and policy advocacy efforts. Theodore's business philosophy had been permanently changed by his relationship with Maria, evolving from pure profit maximization to a more comprehensive understanding of success that included social impact and ethical responsibility. His investment decisions increasingly reflected values of fairness and community benefit that he had learned through observing Maria's example of putting others' welfare first. The ripple effects of Maria's influence continued to expand as Lucas and Emily began their independent adult lives. Both carried forward her lessons about the importance of recognizing and respecting all forms of work, particularly care work that was often undervalued by society despite its essential nature. Community recognition of Maria's contributions continued to grow, with various organizations honoring her advocacy work and leadership in domestic worker rights. These honors were meaningful not just for the recognition they provided, but for the platforms they created to continue raising awareness about issues affecting care workers. The Foundation's work had evolved into a comprehensive approach to supporting domestic workers that included direct financial assistance, policy advocacy, research initiatives, and community organizing support. This multifaceted strategy reflected Maria's understanding that lasting change required both individual support and systemic transformation. International attention to the Foundation's work brought opportunities to influence global conversations about care work and family structures. Maria's participation in these discussions provided perspectives from someone who had experienced both the challenges and possibilities of domestic employment, lending authenticity to academic and policy discussions. The transformation of their relationship from employer-employee to chosen family represented a model for how American society might evolve to better recognize and value care work. Their story demonstrated that mutual respect and recognition could create relationships that benefited everyone involved while challenging traditional power structures. As Emily prepared to graduate from college and enter medical school, she frequently credited Maria's example for inspiring her career choice and approach to patient care. Her understanding of medicine as both technical skill and compassionate service reflected values that Maria had modeled throughout her childhood and adolescence. Lucas's development as a social entrepreneur was similarly influenced by Maria's example of using whatever resources and opportunities were available to benefit others rather than just oneself. His business ventures were designed to create positive social impact while generating sustainable profits, demonstrating that ethical leadership could be financially viable. Theodore's reflection on his wealth and its purposes had evolved dramatically under Maria's influence, shifting from accumulation for its own sake to strategic deployment for community benefit. His approach to estate planning ensured that his resources would continue supporting causes that honored Maria's example long after his own death. Sarah's integration into the family had been facilitated by her immediate recognition and respect for Maria's role, but their relationship had developed into genuine friendship based on shared values and mutual support. Their collaboration on health programs for domestic workers demonstrated how different professional skills could be combined to address community needs. The mansion's evolution from a showcase of individual wealth to a community resource reflected the family's changed understanding of privilege and responsibility. The space regularly hosted events and programs that brought together people from different backgrounds, creating opportunities for connection and mutual understanding. Maria's own sense of purpose and dignity had been restored through the recognition and respect she had gained, but more importantly, through the knowledge that her love and care had made lasting differences in the lives of people she valued. Her influence extended far beyond the immediate family, to include community members, policy changes, and future domestic workers who would benefit from her advocacy. The story of Maria and the Whitman family had become a symbol of possibility for transforming relationships based on exploitation into bonds based on mutual respect and genuine care. Their example provided hope that American society could evolve to better value care work and recognize the essential contributions of domestic workers. Years passed, and the Foundation's influence continued to expand both nationally and internationally. Maria's speeches at conferences and universities inspired new generations of advocates and policymakers to consider domestic worker rights as fundamental human rights issues rather than merely employment concerns. The scholarship program had grown to support thousands of students annually, creating a network of professionals who carried forward Maria's values into various careers and communities. Many recipients maintained connections with the Foundation, contributing their own time and resources to support the next generation of students from domestic worker families. Emily's completion of medical school and residency in pediatrics represented the fulfillment of dreams that had been shaped by her childhood experiences with both illness and healing. Her approach to patient care was marked by unusual attention to family dynamics and social circumstances, understanding that medical treatment required attention to emotional and social factors as well as physical symptoms. Lucas's success in sustainable business development had earned him recognition as a leader in social entrepreneurship, but he consistently credited Maria's influence for teaching him that business success without ethical foundation was ultimately meaningless. His companies provided evidence that profitable enterprises could simultaneously address social and environmental challenges. Theodore's transition toward retirement included passing operational control of his businesses to leaders who shared his evolved understanding of corporate responsibility. His legacy would be measured not just in financial returns to investors, but in the positive impact his companies had on workers, communities, and environmental sustainability. Sarah's medical practice had become a model for community-engaged healthcare that served patients across economic and social boundaries. Her work with domestic worker health programs had influenced medical education curricula, ensuring that future doctors would better understand the health challenges facing care workers. The mansion remained the family's primary residence, but had evolved into something more like a community center that happened to be located in a private home. The regular programs and events hosted there created ongoing opportunities for people from different backgrounds to interact and learn from each other. Maria's 70th birthday celebration was marked by the Foundation's announcement of a major expansion of domestic worker support programs, funded by a substantial donation from Theodore and Sarah. The expansion would create comprehensive support systems for care workers in 10 additional cities, replicating successful programs that had been developed in San Francisco. The celebration also featured the premiere of a documentary film about Maria's story and its broader implications for understanding domestic work in American society. The film had been produced by an Oscar-winning director who had been moved by Maria's story and committed to telling it with accuracy and respect for the complex issues involved. International recognition of the Foundation's work brought invitations for Maria to address the United Nations and other global organizations about domestic worker rights and the model of employer-employee relationships that she and Theodore had developed. These appearances provided platforms to influence international policy discussions and inspire similar initiatives in other countries. Media coverage of Maria's story continued to generate interest from domestic workers and employers around the world who wanted to understand how to create more equitable and respectful working relationships. The Foundation developed resources and training programs to help other families implement similar approaches to recognizing and valuing care work. Academic research inspired by Maria's story had contributed to scholarly understanding of domestic work as both economic activity and emotional labor. Universities began offering courses that examined care work through interdisciplinary lenses, recognizing that domestic employment involved complex social and psychological dynamics that had been understudied by traditional academic disciplines. Policy changes influenced by the Foundation's advocacy work had improved working conditions and legal protections for domestic workers throughout California and in several other states. These legislative victories represented concrete improvements in the lives of tens of thousands of care workers who would benefit from better wages, workplace protections, and access to benefits. The ripple effects of Maria's courage in protecting Emily had expanded far beyond their individual family to influence broader conversations about how society values care work and recognizes the essential contributions of domestic workers. Her willingness to speak up despite her vulnerable position had inspired others to advocate for better treatment and recognition of care workers. Emily's specialization in pediatric oncology was directly related to her childhood experience of being cared for during illness and her observation of how medical treatment required both technical expertise and emotional support. Her patients and their families benefited from her unusual understanding of how serious illness affected entire family systems. Lucas's expansion into international development work applied principles he had learned from Maria about respecting local communities and ensuring that economic development projects benefited all stakeholders rather than just investors. His projects in developing countries demonstrated how business ventures could address social needs while generating sustainable profits. Theodore's philanthropy had become increasingly focused on supporting grassroots organizations led by people with direct experience of the issues they addressed. This approach, influenced by Maria's example of the importance of listening to affected communities, had proven more effective than traditional charitable models that imposed solutions from above. Sarah's research into health disparities affecting domestic workers had contributed to medical literature and influenced healthcare policy discussions. Her work documented how employment conditions affected health outcomes and recommended systemic changes that would improve both working conditions and health access for care workers. The mansion's role as a gathering place for diverse communities had created an informal network of relationships that extended far beyond the foundation's formal programs. Regular visitors included domestic workers, policy advocates, academic researchers, business leaders committed to social responsibility, and families who had been influenced by Maria's example. Maria's own reflection on her journey from invisibility to recognition emphasized the importance of collective action rather than individual success. Her speeches consistently highlighted other domestic workers whose stories had not been widely told, but who had shown similar courage and devotion in their own families and communities. The Foundation's research initiatives had documented the economic value of domestic work, contributing to policy discussions about how care work should be recognized and compensated in modern economies. This research provided evidence for legislative proposals and helped shift public understanding of domestic work from personal service to essential economic activity. Community organizing efforts supported by the Foundation had empowered domestic workers to advocate for their own interests rather than relying entirely on outside allies. These grassroots initiatives had proven particularly effective in creating lasting change because they were led by people with direct experience of the issues being addressed. The annual Maria Gonzalez Lecture had become a prestigious event that brought together domestic worker advocates, policymakers, academic researchers, and business leaders to discuss emerging issues and share successful strategies for improving care worker conditions. Speakers included both prominent public figures and domestic workers whose insights provided practical perspectives on policy proposals. International delegations regularly visited San Francisco to learn about the Foundation's approach to domestic worker support and the model of employer-employee relationships that Maria and Theodore had developed. These exchanges created opportunities to influence policy and practice in other countries while learning from international experiences. The impact assessment studies commissioned by the Foundation documented both the immediate benefits of their programs and the longer-term effects on families and communities. These evaluations provided evidence that investments in domestic worker support generated broader social and economic returns that benefited entire communities. Media attention to domestic worker issues had increased substantially, partly due to the Foundation's work and Maria's willingness to share her story publicly. This coverage had influenced public opinion and created political pressure for policy changes that improved working conditions and legal protections for care workers. The scholarship program's alumni network had become a powerful force for continued advocacy and support for domestic workers. Many recipients had achieved professional success in fields where they could influence policy and practice affecting care workers, creating a multiplier effect that extended the Foundation's impact. Educational partnerships with universities had created opportunities for students to engage directly with domestic worker advocacy while developing academic understanding of care work as both economic activity and social relationship. These partnerships ensured that future leaders would have more sophisticated understanding of domestic work issues. The transformation of Maria's life from invisible employee to respected community leader had inspired similar changes in relationships between other employers and domestic workers. The Foundation regularly received inquiries from families who wanted guidance about how to create more equitable and respectful employment relationships. Research collaborations with international organizations had contributed to global understanding of domestic work while establishing the Foundation as a recognized leader in the field. These partnerships created opportunities to influence international policy discussions and share effective strategies across different national contexts. The documentary film about Maria's story had been translated into multiple languages and screened at film festivals and educational institutions around the world. International audiences responded to the universal themes of dignity, respect, and the power of recognizing individual worth despite social and economic differences. Corporate partnerships had enabled the foundation to expand its programs, while demonstrating to business leaders that supporting domestic workers could be aligned with corporate social responsibility goals. These collaborations showed how private sector resources could be effectively deployed to address social issues. The mansion's regular programming had evolved to include cultural events that celebrated the diverse backgrounds of domestic workers and their families. These programs created opportunities for cross-cultural understanding while honoring the contributions of immigrant communities to American society. Maria's writing and speaking about her experiences had contributed to literature and academic discourse about domestic work while reaching general audiences who might not otherwise engage with these issues. Her ability to communicate complex social dynamics through personal narrative had proven particularly effective in changing minds and hearts. Policy advocacy efforts had achieved concrete victories in multiple jurisdictions while building coalitions that continued working for broader systemic changes. The combination of grassroots organizing, research, and strategic lobbying had proven effective in achieving legislative improvements and regulatory changes. The Foundation's model of comprehensive support for domestic workers had been replicated in other cities with adaptations that reflected local conditions and needs. These expansion efforts demonstrated the scalability of approaches that combined direct service, advocacy, and community organizing. International recognition of Maria's contributions had included honorary degrees from universities, awards from human rights organizations, and invitations to address global forums about domestic worker rights. These honors provided additional platforms to influence policy discussions and inspire similar initiatives. The intergenerational impact of Maria's story was becoming evident as Emily and Lucas began their own families and careers. Both had internalized values about the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect, regardless of their economic or social position, and were transmitting these values to their own children. Theodore's reflection on his wealth and its deployment had influenced other business leaders to consider more comprehensive approaches to philanthropy and corporate responsibility. His example demonstrated how individual transformation could have broader impact on business culture and social expectations. Sarah's medical practice and research had influenced healthcare policy discussions while providing direct benefits to domestic worker families. Her work demonstrated how professional skills could be deployed to address social issues while advancing medical understanding of health disparities. The mansion's evolution from private residence to community resource had influenced discussions about how wealthy individuals could use their resources and spaces to benefit broader communities. The model they had developed provided practical examples of how privilege could be shared without being surrendered. Maria's mentorship of young domestic workers had created a network of advocates who carried forward her example of courage and commitment to collective action. These relationships ensured that her influence would continue through future generations of care workers and advocates. The Foundation's comprehensive approach to social change had influenced other organizations to adopt similar strategies that combined direct service, policy advocacy, research, and community organizing. This model had proven more effective than single strategy approaches in achieving lasting systemic change. The story of Maria and the Whitman family had become a symbol of possibility for transforming exploitative relationships into bonds based on mutual respect and recognition of shared humanity. Their example continued to inspire others to examine their own relationships and consider how they might create more equitable and caring communities. Now, years later, as Maria sits in her comfortable chair overlooking the San Francisco Bay, she can see the lights of Oakland twinkling across the water where her journey began. The little girl who was once close to death under her care has become a doctor dedicated to healing children. The boy who once drew stick figures of their family has become a businessman who puts people before profits. The wounded millionaire has learned that love cannot be bought, but must be given freely and recognized gratefully. Maria's hands, still gentle despite their age, hold letters from scholarship recipients who credit her foundation with changing their lives. Her photograph hangs in the mansion's main hallway, but more importantly, her values live in the hearts of the family she helped heal and the community she helped transform. She saved Emily's life that autumn evening, but in doing so, she saved them all. And you? Have you ever cared for someone who later forgot you? Tell me your story in the comments. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe so this message reaches another woman who deserves to feel seen. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special podcast with more moving stories. You can find it by clicking on the left. Thank you for walking this path of the heart with us. We'll meet again in our next story.